set up localization. Localization is the way Linux is customized for a specific language, dialect, and national format. The details specify things like character sets, the way numbers are formatted, the way currency is presented, and more. The current language default is set in the etc default locale configuration file. It specifies the lang environment variable, and the value of that variable, en_US, specifies English in the US dialect, and UTF-8, which is the standard Unicode translation format for the way characters appear. If you accepted the defaults during a regular US installation process, this is what you should see. For more details, run the locale command on your system. Yeah, it looks like a lot of environment variables set to the same value, but each of these environment variables go into more detail. But first, let's examine what each of these environment variables mean. LC_C specifies how characters are classified, the difference between upper and lower case, and more. LC_numeric is a variable which sets the formats associated with numbers, such as the use of decimal points and commas. LC_time that determines the display of dates and time in hours, minutes, and seconds, or some other format. LC_collate that configures how characters are spaced together. LC_monetary that determines monetary formats, such as how dollars and cents or maybe pounds and pence are written. LC_messages that sets how messages and responses are formatted. LC_paper that determines the paper output to a printer, and that's closely related to the etc/paper size file. LC_name that sets the format for usernames. Some Asian localization sets would put the last name first. LC_address that sets the configuration of mailing addresses for snail mail or postal use. LC_telephone that's a variable that configures how telephone numbers are displayed. LC_measurement that's associated with weights and measures. It can be configured to metric, US scales, imperial scales, and so on. Finally, the LC_identification variable is normally set to the standard development group associated with open source, in this case the Free Software Foundation. Let's look at more detail on a couple of these variables, and that's possible with the locale-ck command. For example, let's see what happens when I run the locale-ck LC_numeric command. Look at that, it specifies how decimal points are formatted, the comma as a separator for the thousands location, the way numbers are grouped, and so on. Let's look at how time is formatted. Look at that, a lot of details from the month, AM, PM, and so on. You can repeat this process for each of the locale variables. I'll let you do that on your own. Let's add some language packs. While it's possible to install the packages associated with a language from the command line interface, this is one place where I believe the GUI is more efficient. Let's see what it would take to install the packages associated with the Zulu language. I first search for the appropriate packages with the apt cache search Zulu command, and that looks fairly manageable. I can pick the appropriate packages and install them. I don't have to install KDE packages if I don't have the KDE desktop environment installed. But let's try a slightly more common language. French. Whoops, there are a lot of packages associated with the French language, over 100, and I wouldn't want to take the time to type all those package names in. That's why the GUI in this case is more efficient. Assuming you have sufficient disk space available, the GNOME Language Support tool is more efficient, and it's indirectly cited in the UCP curriculum based on the GNOME Language Selector command, and that command, as shown here, opens the Language Support tool, shown here. Look at all the languages that are available. It's fairly easy to use. Just to pick a language that you need supported, make sure it's checked, click Apply. The Language Support tool starts downloading the appropriate packages and installs them. And once that's done, you'll also want to pick the default language that you want. Note how there are many different national-based dialects for different languages. Once the process is complete, the Language Support tool prompts you to reboot the system to restart the system in the desired language. But a reboot would take a bit too much time for this video, so for the purpose of the video, I've restarted a system in the French language. Note the messages shown here are shown in a mix of English and French. English is still the language that Linux is programmed in, but the error messages are shown in French. When I open up a GNOME tool, such as the Language Selector tool, all the stuff in there is also shown in French. How about that? Now that you know what can be done with the GNOME Language Selector command, how it can be used to add language packs, it's time for the next video. The administrative sudo. By default, you're not allowed to use the root account in Ubuntu Linux. Yeah, there's a way to set up a password for the root user. All you would need to do to log into the root account is run the sudo su command. Look at that, we're now in the root account. And to confirm, we see that the root account's home directory is /root. And if you really wanted to, you could run the password command while in the account, and that would allow you to log in directly as the root user. But that's strongly discouraged in Ubuntu Linux. And that's the reason for the sudo command. It allows users who are members of the admin group to run administrative commands as long as it's prefaced with a sudo. The admin group is defined in the etc group and etc gshadow configuration files. Let's see how the sudo works. We'll try an example administrative command. In this case, fdisk-l, which should list configured partitions. Without the sudo, I get nothing. But with the sudo, I see configured partitions. Normally, when I run the sudo command, I'm also prompted to enter my own account password. But if I've already done so in the past 15 minutes, I'm not prompted again. Okay, let's see the admin group in the etc group configuration file. There it is. I can see that my own account, Michael, is a member of the admin group, in this case with a group ID of 117. It's also so listed in the etc/gshadow configuration file. There it is. If you want more users to have administrative privileges, you'd add them to the admin group in both etc/group and etc/gshadow files. I have to discuss one variation of the sudo command. The sudo edit command is specifically cited in the UCP curriculum. When you run the sudo edit command on a specific file, it's equivalent to sudo-e on that file. It automatically opens that file in a text editor. And let's try that with the gshadow configuration file. Look at that. It directly opened that file in a text editor. In this video, I explain the workings of the etc/sudoers configuration file. The directives of this file determine permissions and rights associated with the sudo command. But I have to back up a bit. In the UCP curriculum, there's a reference to the vi sudo command, which is dedicated to opening the etc/sudoers configuration file. You'd think with the administrative privileges associated with the sudo command, you'd be able to open anything in read-write mode. But wait, as you can see in the note at the bottom of the file, this file is opened read-only. You get a warning that you're changing a read-only file. And that's not good enough. So let's get out of here and run the vi sudo command. You don't need to specify the file, since vi sudo is dedicated to the etc/sudoers configuration file. And there it is. etc/sudoers is now opened in read-write mode and is now ready for editing. Let's look at this file. The first directive, by default, minimizes the effect of environment variables by resetting them whenever you use the sudo command. The second directive, for the moment at least, is commented out. If you were to activate it by removing the # in front, the %sudo indicates the group. In other words, members of the sudo group, as defined in the etc/group and etc/gshadow configuration files, from all systems would have password-free access to all administrative commands. Then the next command, root all equals all in parentheses all. That gives the root user password-free access to the sudo command. Yeah, that's what you want. But let's look at the format of the directive. Root is the user. You have access from all systems, local or remote. It's run as any user, and you have privileges to all commands. So let's look at the next directive. The %admin refers to the admin group, not only in etc/group, but also in etc/gshadow. And you have access from all systems, as all users, to all administrative commands. One more thing suggested in the UCP curriculum. It's possible to set up these directives with limited permissions. Here's an example. I've already added it as the last line in this file. And with that line, I've specified the LP admin group, which you might remember is the group of print administrators. I've given them access from all systems, local or remote, and this is password-free access to the fdisk utility. So let's see who are members of the LP admin group. Users Michael and Donna are members of this group. So I log in to Donna's account and I run the sudo fdisk-l command. And I see the partitions on the current hard drive. Without the sudo, I'd get nothing. Add more users from the command line. There are a number of ways to add users and groups directly from the command line interface. Of course, you could edit the files of the Shadow password suite directly. And then there are the traditional commands, user add, group add, and so on. But that takes some work. Additional commands are required to add the new user's home directory, populate it with appropriate files, set up a password, and so on. For that reason, Ubuntu encourages the use of the add user command. It automates the process. The add user command is specified in the UCP curriculum. This command is actually a script which prompts you for all needed information. So let's try it out. We'll run the sudo add user Dickens command. Look, it tells me what it's done. It's added user Dickens to the Shadow Password Suite database. It's added a group named Dickens to the etc/group and etc/gshadow configuration files. It's identified the user ID and group ID number as 1002. It's created the appropriate home directory and copied files from the etc/skel configuration directory. Let's take a look at that directory. Note that most of the files in the directory are hidden. Okay, let's continue on. We're prompted for information, such as the password. We're prompted to confirm the password. We'll enter the name, the room number, the work phone. Actually, none of these additional values past the password are absolutely necessary. But there it is. I've entered it, and it's something you can do too with your users in the enterprise. We've confirmed that the information is correct, and we can check the result. First, let's look at the contents of the home directory, and we see that Dickens's home directory is added with ownership given to Dickens as a user. We see it's been populated with files from the etc scale directory with appropriate ownership. Finally, we check the etc/password configuration file. And look, all the additional information that I entered, the full name, room number, office phone, and so on, are also included in the password database. That's the command line method for adding users, at least as cited in the UCP curriculum. Add more users with users admin. The other method for creating users, at least as specified in the UCP curriculum, relates to the users-admin command. Once started in the GUI, it opens the user settings tool, as shown here. I click the unlock button. I select my account or any account in the admin group. I enter the appropriate password and click authenticate. Have to remember my password, of course. And now I have full privileges to the user settings tool. I click add user to open the new user account window. Under the account tab, all I absolutely have to enter is the username, as well as the password. The profile I select determines what's selected in the User Privileges tab. For the purpose of this demonstration, I select Unprivileged, which deselects all the options under the User Privileges tab. What you select under this tab determines the group membership for this new user. These are groups as specified in the etc/group and etc/gshadow configuration files. Let's go over these one by one. Access external storage devices automatically. That makes this user a member of the PlugDev group and allows them to access things like USB keys and external drives. Administer the system. That makes the user a member of the admin group and gives that user sudo privileges. Now that mouthful, allow the use of file systems, etc., allows the user to mount remote file systems such as over a network. Connect to the internet using a modem makes this user a member of the DIB group and gives that user dial-out access. Manage printers makes the user a member of the LP admin group and makes that user a print administrator. Monitor system logs. That makes a user a member of the ADM group. And if you look in the var/log directory, you'll note that the ADM group is the group owner of a number of log files. Send and receive faxes makes the user a member of the fax group and gives that user such privileges on connected fax modems. Share files with the local network. You may not see that on your system if you haven't installed the Samba file server. If you do see it on your system, activating this option makes the user a member of the Samba share group, which allows the user to share things like their home directory with other systems on the network. The Use Audio Devices option makes that user a member of the audio group. To review available audio devices, you can run the command as shown. Use CD-ROM drives gives that user privileges to CD-DVD drives, or any devices with CD-ROM in the device. If you actually have a floppy drive, this option gives you privileges to mount said drives. The Use Modems group, or the Use Modems option, makes that user a member of the dial-out group. For a user to use a modem completely, that user has to be a member of the dial-out, the DIP, and I would think the fax modem group as well. The Use Scanners option makes that user a member of the Scanners group. No big surprise there. And you get a similar result if you select Use Tape Drives. That user becomes a member of the tape group. Now let's take a quick look at the third tab. I click Advanced, and I see a default home directory for the new user, named after the username. I have a selection of different shells. I can select a main group for this particular user. And generally, a user should belong to their own group. And by default, the user ID is set to the next available number above 1,000. If I clicked OK, I'd see that user in the User Settings window.